where we're going to be looking at COVID-19, ongoing management and control in food manufacturing. For those of you who've been fortunate enough not to meet me before, I'm Peter Littleton. I'm the current chair of SOFHT, and I'll be chairing today's session. As I've just mentioned, being recorded for later review and available for people who are unable to attend today. So just a good old GDPR, make sure you're all aware of that. If you could please remain on mute unless you're asking a question, that will help us greatly for any background noise. It's amazing the number of times that somebody next door decides they want to start drilling a hole, cutting fences or digging up the road as soon as you go on to an online meeting these days, which is always good fun. If you are struggling with connections, we often find that turning off your camera may help. This has got a little bit easier since the schools have gone back because we haven't got children downstairs watching Netflix or playing online gaming, so we're not trying to share our bandwidth between multiple devices. And there is a chat function which we'll be monitoring, so if you want to submit questions at any point through the chat function, then please feel free to do so, and we'll keep monitoring that. That way we can filter that into the process as we go. So today we are joined by an expert panel who'll be looking to share their experiences with us. We've got John Simmons, Director at Acheta Consulting, Michael McGale, Technical Officer for Health and Safety at Horsham District Council, Fiona Fleming, Group Technical Hygiene Manager for Two Sisters, and one of my colleagues on council, and Paul Davidson, Quality Management Director in the EU for Tate and Lyle Sugars, also a member of the SOFHT Council. So thank you very much all for joining us today. And on the basis of chivalry, if I could ask if we could start ladies first. Fiona, is there anything you'd particularly like to share with us with regard to how your organisation is adapting and managing to continue to control COVID?
Well, as you're all probably aware, we've had two sites that were temporarily shut. So what I'm going to offer today is some practical advice on how we went about reopening those sites and what we had to take into consideration. We are continually, we're doing COVID audits on sites, and then as a group we're doing governance audits. So the first round was in June and we're ready to do another round. So we've got some independent assessments from group technical and group health and safety colleagues planned in. So that's how we're going to be monitoring our manufacturing businesses to ensure our workforce safety.
Okay, fantastic. Guys, anybody want to join in? We tend to have more of a conversational style, as you know, on these things. So I'll try and I'll do my best to keep quiet as much as possible. Stop laughing, Fiona. Yeah, Guy, Paul, are you adapting a similar sort of thing?
Yeah, hi Peter, I hope you can hear me okay. I've chosen to take the camera off this time since I had trouble last time. I think that's good advice. So,
coming through loud and clear, Paul, thank you. So
thank you. Yeah, I mean we've been fortunate that we've managed to remain open. I think because of the scale of some of our sites and the way the staffing works, our actual working areas are quite well isolated, as in from social distancing. So our issue may be slightly different to Fiona's, as in experience. Our issue is more about when we're bringing in some of our office staff, because some of our large sites also double up like head offices where we have large volumes of other functions working. So we've got a slightly different challenge around outside of manufacturing of which teams want to return and how we house them safely. So I can come on to that in a minute, but no, I think from what Fiona's describing, we haven't experienced that yet.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. Fantastic, thank you. John, would you like to introduce yourself and your involvement with this?
Yeah, John Simmons from Akita Consulting. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure that many of you do, we're a specialist pest management consultancy. No, we're not a pest control contractor as such, but a consultancy offering troubleshooting and independent field biologist services. So really, I think I'm here today probably more to answer questions than to help sites in terms of COVID-related policy. There's certainly been, I hesitate to use the term scaremongering, but certainly in the early days of COVID, it did seem to me that there was quite a lot of scaremongering going on from a pest infestation point of view, of various people saying that sites were going to be overrun by pests as soon as lockdown and what have you happened. And I don't know if the experience out there is actually different to that. There were definitely cases in the early days where rat activity or rat sightings went through the roof in big urban areas like central London, Paris, New York. It was reported. And it's not surprising, when they haven't got anything to eat because all the restaurants and what have you and hotels are shut, then of course they're going to be out and about more looking for food. But I think the reality since then, I mean, nobody's gathering statistics on this or any sort of quantitative data, but I suspect the reality, as long as sites have dealt with things appropriately, i.e. if they were going to shut sites or parts of sites down, they were cleaned and maintained properly before that happened. I suspect the reality of a lot of pest infestations will be that activity has declined because there was nothing for them to eat. But anyway, as I say, I'm here primarily to answer questions. So, if anybody has any pest-related questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, John. And Michael, if you'd like to introduce your interest to this area. The words of 2020, Michael, you're on mute. The phrase of the year, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it such?
Thank you for that. I actually have a T-shirt I have made specifically for these meetings, which says, "I'm not on mute, I'm ignoring you."
So, that, or can you hear me now?
You may regret asking me to take it off mute, but we can see.
Never.
Yeah, I'm the Health and Safety Enforcement Officer at Horsham District Council for the Environmental Health Department. I don't specialise in the food aspect of things, but I directly work with my direct colleagues and my manager, etc. do. And there's that obvious crossover, and certainly maybe the early confusion as to where principally the risk of COVID sat. And I think the answer to that, it sits all by itself, albeit we still have within health and safety management systems COSH, which we forget about, I believe, and in a strange way incorporates COVID. And we still have that principal management tool of risk assessment, which is the mandatory one of the many mandatory stipulations that have come out of COVID. So in way of prevention and where we are up to date with how we act as an enforcement authority, we're still being very proactive and advisory, and we still intend to find initiatives that give us a further platform for that, including visits, social media, and press releases, etc. And then we are at the same time, because of the mad and ongoing nature of COVID guidance and regulation and the manner in which it's changing, we are liaising heavily with our stakeholders in enforcement, and with that I mean the police, trading standards, highways, county council, government departments, along those lines. What's been a surprise to us and a real sort of reactive management on our part is how many businesses across such a varied spectrum of industries are incorporating enforcement from so many different areas of local government, i.e. the police, trading standards, highways. And it really is a case of between each other, we're finding our own feet and communicating, maybe not as formally as memorandums of understanding, but we're certainly communicating to the extent that we're giving ourselves an indication of what each other are doing to avoid contradiction. I'll give you a very brief example. We receive a risk assessment with a company or a group wanting to carry out a mass gathering, but within the realms of COVID secure measures. We see nothing wrong with that risk assessment, yet the police get a phone call from a concerned member of public that there's a gathering of 30, 40, 50, 60, sometimes maybe over 100 people in a field or at a premises. So what we're trying initially to avoid is have those areas of communication open, so at least each other are knowing what we're doing. That said, I'm not saying it's working and we're still in that trying stage, but fundamentally that's what we're busy doing at the moment.
Well, I mentioned this on a meeting I was looking after yesterday, but I've stopped myself from using the phrase new normal and now switched to using the phrase here and now, because new normal seems to be different from certainly a day-to-day basis, if not an hour-by-hour basis at the moment. Yeah, so definitely. It's just whatever we're in at the moment. Okay, that's fantastic. So Fiona, if I could come to yourself and Paul again, and just in terms of how you're finding, you mentioned about sites that you've had closed, just how the continuation of this pandemic is affecting your businesses and your management of it.
I suppose the biggest challenge is the communication piece, because things are changing hourly, and then we do have businesses that are we've got one in Scotland and then one in Wales and then the rest in the UK, in England. So their rules are ever so slightly different. So the senior management have the conversations with the enforcement authorities, and I'm sort of the boots on the ground. So when we had temporary closures in Wales, there were slightly different requirements than what we were used to from PHE. And then when we had the closure in Scotland, the temporary closure in Scotland, there were again differences, and some of the enforcement authorities' guidance was conflicting. So one authority would say you have to do this, and the other would say, well, you don't have to. So we had to navigate our way through it. But my on-the-ground involvement was really getting the sites ready for reopening. So we were temporarily closed for 14 days because of the number of cases. So it was, how do we get back open and have the approval? Because the authorities came to sites and assessed the measures that we'd put in place. So I'd say it was a big learning curve, but if you've got a serious incident or a crisis management or a business continuation plan, you should already have updated them. And as Michael talked about risk assessments, that's one of the first things we did very early on. We updated all the risk assessments at the site, and that formed part of the audits that we completed as group technical function. So we looked at the risk assessments, and then we shared learnings across all of our businesses and all the sites, and what differences and what worked and what didn't. And then learnings from the temporary closures was plan, 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 and plan again. And individuals have to do one of two. Look at everything, otherwise you will miss something. There's so much that needs to be covered that you have to have people specialising in certain aspects. So mine was really about the pre-opening cleans and making sure we have the pre-opening checklist in place. So it was really about the hygiene activities that we put in place. And we also had some engineering works where we had an opportunity, whilst the site was closed and there was no one around, to pull forward some things that we needed to do, that you need to do when the sites are empty. And we also pulled forward all the high-level periodic cleaning, and we got all of that done within the time. So we took advantage of the opportunities to do those things.
You don't often get a scenario like that where an operation is empty.
Absolutely, if there's no one
for
around.
period of time. Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, there's always somebody about. So no, that's fantastic. Paul, is that sort of similar for your experiences?
So I'm going to take a slightly different angle, Peter, because we were, again, one of the
Of course.
fortunate businesses that where we didn't have to either close or reopen the site. And of course, to Fiona's point, we've got contingency plans, we've got the risk assessments. And I would say on risk assessments, do share those with the people that are coming into work, because they need to feel that you have these checks and balances for their own safety in place. So it's really important to share that with the general workforce that's coming in. It does, well, one, it points out what, you know, what we're doing to consider their safety, and secondly, it also shows them, you know, it reinforces some of the rules that we've got on site.
And
But I
thirdly,
think,
Paul, it's a legal requirement.
absolutely, so do have those very visible. So I want to just have a look at some tips of things that we've picked up recently. So let's look at some of the areas that have been empty are things like office areas, certain sections of the factory. So we've taken the opportunity while the offices are empty to literally clear desks and to re-establish positions in offices, and that's no different to what you would do actually on the manufacturing areas, because I would say most companies have been operating for 6-7 months now and have that, you know, pretty well established. So but some of these other areas you can use the same principles. So, you know, have those desks spaced out, have desks closed off, that remove chairs. It's really good to remove desks and chairs because people have a tendency to migrate towards them, so take them out of the area. And we've looked at bubbles as well, because you hear the word bubbles and, you know, forming your bubble, and you can do that within, obviously within manufacturing you have shifts or areas, so you can use that in office environments. So we've looked at putting people in completely different office areas, and if you've got people that have, and I would say if you don't have to be in, you shouldn't be in. If you can work from home, you know, that's really the number one point. But if it is right for you to come into work, then, you know, look at things like, if you've got like a department of accountants or department of quality, do they all need to be in the same room, or can you move them into different rooms? Because if you ever did have an outbreak, you could literally wipe a team out that are now self-isolating. So, you know, you have to think about, you know, almost worst case and work backwards. So mix people up, different rooms, spaced out. And then one-way systems would be my other point. We've done a lot of work, and really not only do the offices look very different, but the thoroughfare through the buildings very, very different. Lots of things on the floor, like footprints that are painted on the floors, or using some of these labels. You know, you can use tape, but really just the more you can reinforce the distance and the expectations, the more you can do training and just literally show people the new routing, because people returning to site after 4 or 5 months have never been on site, aren't used to this day-to-day experience that the operators are getting. So it's really important to remember, for some of this, it's their first time on site. So I would say, if you are looking to bring more people onto site, you know, you have to be really, really careful how you do that.
Yeah, and I would agree with because what we had to do when we did the pre-opening was we staggered everybody coming back, and they had an induction. So the workforce came in at certain numbers. They sat in an open area, and they were told and talked through, this is the new rules, this is what we're doing now, this is the route into the factory, and this is what the expectations are, before they went anywhere else. So they were marshalled. We then implemented marshals, where maybe we had 1 or 2, we upped the numbers to stop the herding that was happening. We also, as much as we thought we had sufficient external smoking areas and eating areas, as you said, if you put a chair there, somebody will move it and sit next to someone they want to be conversing with. So we had to make marks that this is not to be moved, you cannot sit here. You basically, and somebody said, it's all very antisocial. Kind of like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock.
Yeah, that's the point.
And you got it, that's the point. Yes. We took the opportunity to put screens up on desks in offices, so that whilst you were sitting at an office, and although you're 2 meters away, when you then start to talk to people, you've got that barrier So, as much as you're 2 meters, you may want a conversation with somebody. A lot of sites are now wearing masks, surgical masks, whilst on site. So previously it was you could wear them to work, but now sites are saying you need to wear them everywhere, because that's what the general public have been instructed to do. So we've implemented lots of different things, and it's now becoming common. So it's not unusual to go to a site and say you have to wear a visor and you've got to put this mask on as you sign in, and then you keep it on until you get to an area where you are, I'd say enclosed, but where you're in your own bubble or your own isolated booth, which is usually a desk that you get to work at. And again, one-way systems, turnstiles are free moving, clocking in, where you have to put in key codes with open doors, so they're not again, they're not a source of contamination, but obviously that brings with it security issues. So all the sites have gone through a rapid learning process through the last 7 months. So as well as having to work flat out to manufacture food, we've had to then incorporate all the different changes and social distancing measures that make the workforce know that we are looking after their well-being, and as Paul said, sharing information, highlighting things to them, communicating to them, and making sure that everything that we do is in all the languages that are spoken on site, so that everybody gets the same information, which is something that we would do as food businesses, but we need to make sure we do it across everything that we are attempting to communicate to our workforce. So it's been a pretty steep learning curve.
Fiona, if I can just add something, I totally agree with everything you said there. Just some tips that we found with the one-way systems, for anyone that's looking to put those in, just assume complete ignorance of the person, that you have to literally guide them. So lots of signage,
Yes.
with arrows, and you might find that there's different office sections. So you might say, if you're going to this office block, you follow this green route. If you're going to that office block, you follow the blue route. Make it really, really clear, and don't forget to put lots of no entry signs, because they're so used to going through certain doors, and they might say, well, I can just go through there, why do I have to go around this route again? And there is a reason for that, and you have to make it really, 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 double your signage, make it super clear. And I certainly agree with the training. That's so important, and and videos also help for people to have. So yeah,
there are a couple of sites that have actually done, as part of the induction to visitors coming to site. So if I've gone to a site that I haven't been to prior to this situation, I've had to sit and watch a video of how you walk around the site and the route you have to take, and you can visually see things. So people are queuing at distance to go to the smoking area, and there are seats placed that cannot be moved. So you're actually forcing them to keep their distance from each other. We're kind of fortunate in that office, the people that work in office, the numbers are not the issue for us. A lot of people can work from home, so we've kept them to a minimum. It really is the workforce in the production environment that's our biggest challenge, because there's a lot of them.
If I could just add to that, it's really interesting hearing you speak and make reference to risk assessment and the measures that you're putting in place. And one of the things that you're inadvertently doing, which is a real key to risk assessment and health and safety, I for one often find myself I deliver health and safety training for the CIEH, and I get asked questions, and the most common is like, what is health and safety, etc., and this buzzword of health and safety culture. And it's a difficult question to ask, and it's a goal that is always looked to attain. You know, can you introduce a health and safety culture into your workplace? And you can. And one of the quickest and easiest and most productive ways of doing it is something you've all touched on, and that's that sort of subliminal training, creating sort of behavioral safety, which is the key word in all health and safety. If safety becomes behavioral and you do it unconsciously, then you have a health and safety culture. And signage is fantastic and it's brilliant, but there's nothing like seeing other people follow that signage, because it's human nature to go with the flow and to follow the sheep. And we like to do things that other people are doing. And if you can attain that by sometimes just crossing that leverage, that percentage of getting enough people doing what you're asking them to do. And the classic example of that is examples from managers, directors, heads of service, etc. It's no good if it isn't seen from the top down. But if you do manage to get that, you'll be surprised in which the pace you introduce or the pace in which your risk assessments are becoming successful. And also on the subject of risk assessments are principally the manager's document, but they mean nothing if they're not communicated and shared. And I think you've all touched on that they have to be communicated and shared. When I inspect risk assessments, I always look for someone who is at risk, i.e. the person doing the task, doing the job. I always look for their name on the risk assessment, as well as the managers and as well as the hierarchy of anyone it might be relevant to. So, and also a risk assessment, I believe, should be and looked upon as a training document. It trains you to be safe in the task you're about to do, and whether that's work effectively in an environment or to work a machine or anything of that example. It's a training document, so it belongs with the person who is at risk. And my last comment on risk assessments within COVID, etc., is the legal requirement of risk assessments is there to be suitable and sufficient, which is a very wishy-washy term, and a lot, I wish it was a lot more definitive, but that's the goal that you're aiming for. And there's nothing wrong. In fact, there should be evidence that your risk assessment is reviewed, and you can have control measures that, for example, marshalling is constantly reviewing your risk assessment or having marshals, but there's nothing wrong. A risk assessment is a living document. You should readdress it, review it, and not think twice about changing it. A good risk assessment is a risk assessment that is kept up to date and changed as you learn and as you progress, and as different risks, the priority of different risks change. But yeah, risk assessment, it's great to hear you all talk about that and how you're using it, and the key word, communication, because unfortunately I know I've certainly come across a lot of organisations that spend a lot of money on health and safety and have very good health and safety systems, but they fail in communicating it to their staff, and it's a total waste of money. At this time more than ever, let's not have health and safety or COVID be a waste of resources on us.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I mean, that links in nicely with the question that Deb Smith has posted on the chat about clarifying the legal requirement for risk assessment. And we talk about food safety risk assessment or health and safety related to COVID-19. I think you've probably covered that. Yeah,
the only thing I'd throw in there is that risk assessments have to meet the requirement of being reasonably practicable. And you can the best. There's lots of examples of reasonably practicable that make things clearer. If you're not sure what it exactly means to you, it would probably be more appropriate that you look it up outside this arena. But principally, risk assessment should be suitable and sufficient, a living document, and meet the requirement of reasonably practicable.
Fiona, this is probably one for yourself that's coming also from Deb's about which pre-opening checklist did you use?
Ones that we drafted as we went through. The sites did their pre-closing checklist with some assistance. We had already done in March, as this started out, we kind of were conscious that there may be, fingers crossed there wasn't, instances where we may have had to close sites. So we had done a procedure at that time, and we'd sort of brain dumped everything that we needed to look at. So the pre-opening checklist that we pulled together, that I pulled together for my use, was really about the cleaning, the hygiene bit, and then other functions brought into things like making sure that the chemicals we'd ordered sufficient in time for opening, that the laundry was contacted, that pest control were aware that the site was now open, ordering. There's lots of things that you have to take into account for closing that you then have to revisit for opening. So we kind of pulled one together ourselves, and adapted it as we needed it.
And have you found that there were bits that were missing from that? So when you actually came to implement it, or had you sort of covered 80% or 90%?
Well, I think we'd covered 90%. There was things like the requirement for wearing surgical masks outside of the factory environment, or that was new to sites. So it really was making sure that we were able to source a continued supply, given the issues with masks, for the number of people, because they are single use. So in theory, 3 changes a day, or 4, depending if they're going in and out of the factory environment for breaks, smoke, etc. They would need a new mask. Things like making sure we had sufficient receptacles for throwing them away. We queried whether it was medical waste or not. Those are the sorts of questions, and did we need anything specific? So I think each instance was a learning opportunity for us, and then we made sure that we all put our heads together and said what was done well and what was the learnings, and then we documented those.
Fantastic. There's a question as well from Sarah Howarth. Not sure who would like to handle this one, or whether it's one that we should be handling, but can you share any understanding of where the sources of infection originated from? I think that's quite a big question.
Well, I suppose I think that it wasn't the factory environment it originated from. So whether it was community infections, because a lot of it is hearsay or anecdotal. There was a barbecue and people this and people did that, but I'm not sure anybody really knows unless the authorities have that specific data, because we wouldn't have that data.
I certainly could think back to my years in environmental health and infectious disease investigation.
Yes.
Tracking the source. If it was a large a wedding or cricket lunch, you
easy
could track
to do.
it down. But if it was a smaller event, then it was a lot of fun, a lot of luck often involved in that type of scenario.
Yeah.
Fantastic. John, is there anything? I mean, I've not seen any questions come in regarding pest control. Is there any specific tips or tricks with regard to ongoing? Because I think it's becoming increasingly apparent. We're not going to see the back of this yet.
No.
And for some time to come. So is there any, as we go into the winter months and the colder months, anything we should really be looking out for?
I hesitate to use the words common sense, but common sense does prevail here. And the pests, there's nothing magical about pests and infestation. Pests fundamentally need food, in most cases water. Not all pests require it, but most do in some form or another. They need somewhere to live, and a number of them, certainly the insect pests, benefit from heat or require heat as well. And Yeah, the situation we're in at the moment is really not wildly different to the situation that you would be in with normal operation of a factory in normal times. It's a matter of keeping opportunities for food and harbourage and entry to pests to a minimum. The fact we're coming into winter to a degree might result in increased ingress of rodent pests indoors, but what you have to remember is that the primary rodent pest of interest in the food industry is the house mouse, and it's called the house mouse with good reason, because it's an indoor animal. By and large, there aren't huge populations of them living outdoors, wanting to swamp, wanting to run in and swamp your factories. When factories have house mice, they generally have, or often they have, an infestation that's resident within the fabric of the building. So really, from a COVID point of view, I think it's it's a little bit of a red herring. I would have to say that if you do the right things, whether it's a COVID situation or not, it should minimise your pest activity. There's probably not a lot more to be said on that score. As I said earlier, I do think there's been an element of scaremongering going along, and I don't know if there's anybody on this call that's from the hotel trade, or I'm sure that there will be consultants on who are maybe working with hospitality venues. One thing that has been apparent, we do some work with hotels. Unfortunately, the big group that we work with is shut at the moment and is likely to remain shut for the foreseeable future. But there is a plus side to the current situation for them, in that not only has the mouse population, not that it was big in the first place, but what was there has largely gone away because there's no food. But similarly, the bedbug population, and big problems with bedbugs nationally and internationally. And from anecdotally, the populations of those have collapsed because they've got nothing to feed on. There's nobody in the rooms for them to feed on at night. So get the fundamentals right, get the proofing right, get the cleaning right. If you're going to shut down, then make sure you do a thorough deep clean, a removal of all food products before you do so, and you should minimise the problems and keep pest control going. Pest control is a prerequisite from a food safety and a hazard point of view. You can't suspend it. You might want to rationalise the people that are coming onto site, but you cannot suspend it.
It's amazing. I've picked up at least 3 different silver linings to this whole crisis
Yeah.
that I've never really thought of.
I was still thinking the same.
Collapse in the bedbug population is no bad thing. Just thinking, John, in terms of where Paul was talking earlier about the fact that maybe offices or the areas are I was going to use the term mothballed, and I'd rather not, but I just have.
Yeah.
Is there anything there that, Paul, that you've been thinking about with empty office spaces that has a pest control element, or anything that needs to be thought about?
No, because these areas are under normal inspection anyway, so we haven't, we obviously don't stop the inspections, so they're all covered. Foot traffic is important. If you've got a lot of foot traffic, it tends to keep, activity down. If areas have been empty for a while, it has the opportunity to encourage, and also, lights out, lights on. These all have factors, but I think most of the office areas, we haven't seen any difference in the areas. One question I got for John, I'm quite interested in, is some of the pest control officers. They're in and out of different businesses, and I'm sure if Fiona and I compared rules between businesses, we've all got local rules, how we've interpreted things. So these poor officers are having to adopt different rules for different experiences on a daily basis. So I just wonder how they're finding it, where masks are mandatory in all areas versus some areas not, versus accompanied, not accompanied. They must be meeting lots of different challenges with the COVID factor on top of overlay rules. I just wondered if you had any feedback on that.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. We've been really frustrated because obviously, as we're not a contractor, we tend to work on a relatively small number of sites. If we go to a site, we're often there for a day, sometimes 2, 3, 4 days. And yeah, we've come up against a problem with a number of food manufacturers who haven't allowed my people in because they say, well, you're going to lots of different sites. Well, yeah, that's true to a limited degree, but equally their pest controllers will probably be going to 10 times more sites than we're going to. And yet, you know, they still permit them on site. It's a matter of, in a sense, it's not wildly different to your own employees. You know, you have no control over those people once they leave your premises. You've got no control over who they're meeting with and where they're going and what they're doing in their spare time. It's a matter of risk assessing it and trying to minimise that risk. On a personal level, you know, one of the things that we put in our own company risk assessment to try and protect our people when they were working on site is that for the time being, accompanying us during inspections, which is pretty much the norm when we're working on site, for the time being, perhaps that should be suspended because, you know, if you've got one or sometimes two or three people accompanying you, social distancing does get forgotten about. You know, people do encroach, and you know that distancing does go, does stop. But the vast majority of sites that we're still working, they still accompany us, and you know that to me is a little bit counterintuitive. And another issue that I've encountered, and this is very much personal, sat here wearing my glasses as I do, is that if I did a risk assessment based on the risk of COVID versus the risk of slips, trips and falls from my glasses fogging up when I'm working in, working with a mask and or a visor on, you know, I know which is the bigger risk to me. It's not COVID, it is that slips, trips and risks fall. But, you know, irrespective of what we put in our health and safety policy, you know, we're having to work within the constraints of the site. So, you know, I'm speaking very much here as a contractor. You know, if you're responsible as you, Fiona and Paul, obviously are, not just for your own people, but for contractors working on your sites, it's important to bear in mind the health and safety constraints that they're working within as well.
Just picking up on that then, so Fiona, Paul, Michael, in terms of the sort of routine visitors, I know certainly from my sector of the camp of hygiene support, you know, we're seeing increasing number of customers who are saying, you know, only essential visits. Is that something where you're restricting multi sort of organisation visitors coming on site?
Yeah, we from the beginning we had business critical only visits, and we listed what they were. If sites want another visit, they have to request from group, and we then make the decision as to whether it's critical or not. So that's how we've managed it, and we've said, you know, where possible and it's safe for the contractor, because we still have a duty of care when they come on our sites. And if it's safe for the contractor to do that task without being accompanied by every man and his dog, then so be it. But it's also looking at doing things out of hours where there's less people around and less need for them to be gathered together, because it's normally in our environments, it's the noise in the factories that make people gather up so you can hear each other.
That happens. That absolutely happens, Fiona, because we like you, we've said absolutely by exception. You know, the number one is most companies and visitors are successfully doing quite advanced virtual audits now. I mean, they really have moved on, and yes. and you know, where it was a bit clunky at the start, I think most people have got into the rhythm, and we're probably with that for the near future. But I think there are some visits that have to be, you know, that have to be in the flesh, and they are by exception. But I mean, we've tried different things. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you're in a noisy factory and you've got ear defenders on and you've got masks on, everything's stacking against you. And I understand what John was saying, because when someone asks a question and someone's listening, the natural instinct is to draw close, and you have to have a lot of policing from managers and supervisors. If you've got people on site, 1, 2 at the most, don't go around as a crowd. You really have to keep the numbers down to probably no more than 3. I mean, you really got to keep it low, and you've got to think about the interactions, and it's so difficult. You've got to be like a hawk on it, just to say, you know, we've got to maintain distance here. So technology, we've looked at technology with microphones and headsets, and while there's some good technology out there, there's loads of blind spots in the factory where you can't get any reception.
Yeah.
And maybe I should put an office there because my phone won't ring. But there are areas that this technology isn't advanced enough yet, or we haven't got the comms network as advanced. So I think it will come. But to Fiona's point, you know, it should start with is this absolutely necessary? Because there are ways of doing virtual audits in a safe manner.
Michael, is that something you're finding within the enforcement community, that that virtual visits? I know we had an HSE visit that was virtual.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think there's a lot of good things that are going to be taken from this COVID experience, and the acceleration of IT into industries and businesses, from small to corporate, you know, national, international ones, will be certainly one of those areas in which we've all benefited from. And I think we're learning to readdress situations from the very beginning, situations which, if it wasn't for COVID and the adaptation that we've had to make, situations we would have just left there without drawing any attention. I hate to sort of keep going on about it, but it's something you can't escape. But that key tool of risk assessment is fundamental in any of these things. And an interesting point from that, I think you touched on, was you've got to understand the principal goal, and the principal goal is the employee safety, but that's a shared safety, and you have responsibility as an employee. And something Fiona mentioned is, when a contractor comes onto your site, you also have a responsibility for their duty of care, and you also have a responsibility to share each other's risk assessment and the risks that you know about that you should be addressing. And between the two, you should find that equilibrium. You should find an equal. You should match if you're visiting a site and they have a risk assessment which has certain measures in, the expectation is you should match that, because that's where the risk, that's the level in which the risk is at. And going back to something that John touched on, and that balance of what risk is greater, etc. I can't disagree that, not having experience with it. I know that goggles, glasses, etc. do steam up, but personal protective should always be fit for purpose. And if it's a distraction, then you need to revisit that area. One can't cancel the other out, unfortunately. But yeah, I think everything that's been said is correct, and we just have to find new ways, and technology is the way in which we're moving forward, and I believe it's a good thing.
I'm not sure about anybody else on the call, but I'm certainly not missing sitting for hours on the M1 waiting for the traffic to clear. So yeah, that's I can find myself sitting, do get to the end of the day and think, I haven't really moved a great deal today. I need to get up. Terrible Teams calls. Fantastic. There is a question from Peter Barrett online. I think this one's probably more directed again to Fiona and to Peter. Paul. Are there any technical solutions to air and surface disinfection that organisations have implemented in shop floor or office environments to assist in pathogen control and therefore SARS-CoV-2 transmission? Thank you, Peter, for using the right term. That's brilliant. E.g. out of hours broad disinfection. So have you looked at other technologies or different technologies? I think is what Peter's really saying there, to over and above what you'd normally do.
Have we looked? We've constantly been bombarded. I had a company that said that was it the 30-day cover once it was sprayed on. A company that said they were experts in this. They'd only been a company since March. So they'd set themselves up. So yes, we've looked, but as a food business, cleaning is what we do as well as make food. So if we can't clean our factories from pathogens, now we're in trouble.
Just for balance on that one, Fiona, I believe that organisation, if it's the one I'm thinking of, is they've had to remove that particular claim from their website because their Trading Standards Authority said, "Can you prove that?"
Yes, the answer's no.
The process. I did actually see another one come through yesterday, which is up the game and was based on the same technology, but saying 90 days.
Okay.
Which is even more interesting. So yes, there are technologies there. Paul, have you had any experiences with those sorts of things?
Yeah, a similar experience. We are bombarded with these super miracle solutions that, you know, clean your hubcaps and everything else. But we've stuck to the traditional methods. I mean, it's, of course, we ask for, you know, if there are people making claims of controls on SARS-2, I always want to see the data for that, and we use reputable companies. And I think, you know, I mean, as soon as you've cleaned a surface, a hand touch point, you're only as good as the next hands that are touching it. And, you know, so it's all about routine. So there isn't anything, you'd have to be, it's a bit like the touch points. If you're doing air quality, you'd have to be permanently misting and spraying stuff. So I think we've tended to avoid that. We've got things up our sleeves for if we ever had to deal with a situation, but that's very much different to the day-to-day cleaning, which we've upped and been very visible. But I think it's really down to the people to maintain their own personal hygiene, because they're the ones that are going to be touching and recontaminating these surfaces.
Yeah, they're the carriers, aren't they?
They are
the carriers.
They are. So,
so
I'm afraid no miracle new technology that
I mean, fogging and UV, they do have the place, but if our sites were fogging anyway, we've continued fogging, but we're not having men in hazmat suits coming around or women spraying things, because we know our chemicals that we use are good at the pathogenic side. So we've got the food safety side covered. Therefore, by default, the extra cleaning, the extra measures we've put in place to secure the workforce's well-being, we just need to make sure we are consistently doing them, and that they're done to the right standard.
Had a conversation with the site where they wanted to look at fogging their cold store environment, and we worked out they would need 75 foggers in order to achieve that. And it was unless you've got Spider-Man sneezing into the back of your air conditioning unit, then what's treat that.
And fogging is not going to get all of the touch points.
It's not going to get underneath.
It's only where it falls. So you're much better by a manual wipe if.
As Paul, I think fogging and aerial disinfection is a very proven technology and certainly has its place. But
Absolutely.
As Fiona said there, it's an adjunct to rather than a replacement for cleaning disinfection. That's, I mean, picking up on John's point from earlier about the scaremongering with the pest control.
Yes.
And again, Fiona's point there, there were some companies that appeared very quickly with niche technologies, which as part of a regime would be fantastic, but it wasn't necessarily portrayed. It was portrayed as a savior type technology rather than as a add this to what you're already doing, and it gives you that extra level of protection. Would you agree with that, Fiona?
Yes. There's also a lot of people that say it's used in the medical. Well, they're full of bugs. Well, of course it would be. They use it in their air environment because hospitals are not food factories. And I've had some quite rude responses to my thank you very much for your. I mean, I do actually answer them all. I am very polite. Chemicals that have been tested for this, that, and the other. Well, we already have that in our portfolio, and we've been using it for many a year. So yeah, I've had some very rude responses from people who say if you think that's adequate, then fine.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting one. Well, we're drawing to a conclusion of our hour-long session. So, if I could just ask our four panelists, if they could just give a quick sort of 30-second, what's the main take-home message you'd want to have from for our delegates from today? So again, if we could start, ladies first.
I think I'm going to go with what Michael says, that risk assessments are a living live document, and the purpose of them is for everyone's welfare and safety. And people do police themselves if you've got clear communication and processes and procedures in place. People are more likely to follow it. And if there's somebody who's an outlier, they are easily noted, and the herd will look after making sure that they get back in line, rather than the enforcement side of things. And plan.
Definitely. John?
Yeah, pest control, it is a prerequisite. It must continue, irrespective of whether you're closing a premises or mothballing it, it has to continue. I've had one or two suggestions in the past 6 months. Well, can't you do your inspection remotely? To which the answer is no, we can't do it remotely. You cannot inspect for pests. Even if somebody walked around a factory with a webcam or a phone showing you as they went, it doesn't get you to the level of detail that you need in order to do an inspection from a pest control point of view. You need to be on your hands and knees looking in those dark corners that people don't go into. So that's one message. And then the other message is do what you've always done, but make sure you do it thoroughly and properly, which is proofing, so making sure they can't get in and they can't move about if they do get in, cleaning to a level. We're talking about cleaning not particularly from a COVID point of view, but from a pest point of view. So making sure there aren't food materials lying around that are going to attract them, and make sure that the pest controllers come in regularly and inspect thoroughly. And it's not rocket science. We just carry on as normal from a pest control point of view, in my view.
Fantastic. Michael?
Just a brief one, really. There's a lot of very good risk assessments and there's a lot of very good health and safety management systems, but the one thing that can make them erratic, the one thing that can threaten them, is the general public, and we often don't, we forget about that. So consider not just your immediate environment, but the people that you really have no control of, and that's the people that you interface with, i.e. the general public. They're the ones that will catch you out.
That's brilliant. And last but certainly not least, Paul?
Yeah, I would say keep the messaging clear, simple, and consistent, and don't feel the urge to keep changing it, because you have the least you can change it, the better it will be followed. Because you think of the core advice from the government, it hasn't really, the initial information we were given of hand washing and distancing, that core message hasn't really changed. And when you start to get into regional differences, that's when people start getting confused. If you think of that at the factory level, keep your messaging consistent, keep it live, keep it up to date, but try not to make unnecessary changes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, we're coming up to 1 o'clock, so we'll draw our time together to a close. If I could just thank John, Michael, Fiona, and Paul for sharing their experiences today. And thank you everybody for sharing your questions as well during the chat. We will be running another one of these soft focuses next month. So many thanks for attending. If any questions have occurred to you afterwards that you wish to share with the panelists, then if you send them through to the SOFHT email address, then we'll route them accordingly. Otherwise, I wish you a very good afternoon, and hopefully see you all soon again. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.